All right, here we go. And I will begin in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Big Thrill video interview series. Today I'm going to introduce you to Joe and Kasey Lansdale, father and daughter duo, who in literary form spend their days fighting demons and wicked jinn with pen and ink across the pages of their latest collaboration, The Case of the Bleeding Wall. And here's a little bit about that one. Seasoned supernatural investigator Dana Roberts is asked to come to Italy by an ex-lover experiencing a strange phenomenon, a wall in his house that seeps blood. She meets Jana Davis at a book signing event where unexpected events thrust the latter into being her backup, and together they head to Italy to only to find the answers they sought to be much more than they anticipated. Dana knows her job and has battled angry jinn, malevolent shadows, ancient travelers, and soul-sucking shapeshifters, but in the case of the Bleeding Wall, she and her new sidekick Jana face a challenge that could end their mortal lives. Joe and Kasey, welcome to the show.
Well done.
Thank you. That was scary.
I know.
Well, second off, I guess, I'm going to, since I just introduced you guys kind of through that latest story, for the listeners out there, I want you guys to know, for those of you who don't know Joe and Kasey Lansdale, the name probably pops into your mind somewhere in at least the back if you're not a prolific reader. But I'm going to share a quick screenshot here of, where'd my app go? I'm going to share a quick screenshot of Joe's bibliography, which is up on the screen right now. Joe and Kasey, you guys probably can't see this. This is slightly over your right shoulders and right to the left of my ear. But I'm going to scroll through this thing just so the viewers can see the list of work that Mr. Joe Lansdale has done. And I'm still scrolling a page at a time here. This guy's written a lot of books. I thought I wrote a lot. I got maybe a dozen books out there, and I thought, boy, am I prolific. And then I open up this bibliography, and you have over 100 various works. Kasey, you've got books, comic books, music, an entire different spectrum. You guys are prolific. Is it something genetic?
Mine pales in comparison, but
You're only just getting started, though, young lady.
It might be that they grew up with me, and going to work all the time and getting up in the morning and doing it. But weirdly, I don't work a ton of hours a day, but I am very dedicated to my work. And I'm interested in a lot of different things, and they had their own interests, but that work ethic may have been passed along, and maybe it's genetic. I don't know.
I think that there is something to, I think we learned early on that it's about quality, not quantity. I know for some people, they sit in front of the computer for 8-10 hours, and that's how they work. I have found that for me, that's not beneficial. I've found that I go in hot right up front, and about 3, maybe 5, if I'm really like cooking, I can last a little longer on that, but I find that the most quality stuff I'm putting out is right up front. And then I spend the rest of my day doing what I want to do or working on other things that are related to it or the marketing side of things, whatever else it is. Right. So I don't feel like I'm not working, but I'm not working in that way that's just, staring at a blank screen. And also I think you do that long enough and you get kind of bummed about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like being a blacksmith at an anvil, and you're just standing there, ping, 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 and if that's all you're doing all day, making horseshoes, it's a pretty boring job. But once you start to get making other stuff,
yeah,
and it sounds like you guys got this past the ping, ping stage pretty well, and that, ladies and gentlemen, was just to introduce you to let you know that these two are not new to this writing rodeo. They've been around the block. So now we're going to get into some direct questions.
Block.
A country block is slightly different for a city block. From
That's
those
true.
of you that don't know, I think them city blocks are like measured out to a quarter. Here in Texas and Alaska, where I'm at, a block could be miles. It could be
a hoot and a holler.
That's it. A hoot.
Yeah, we used to have 2 hoots and a holler. And that meant, and you really knew how far that was because we used to hoot and holler, and people don't do that anymore. So we used to go down here about 2 hoots and a holler, and you knew exactly, within reason how far that was.
That's about how far you could throw your voice a couple of times.
That's right.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and you instead of a phone, your parents used to call you in by your name, and they would. My mother would get out there and Joey, and it would just go like a pig call.
Yep, yep, yep. Oh man, I remember them days.
Yeah,
So speaking of those days, Joe, you've
yep,
been writing for a long time, and we just
yep.
showed that list. It goes back pretty far. What were you? I mean, that list starts in like what, 1981, 1980, 79
And
ish.
1973 really is
Oh,
when I first
73.
started.
Okay, so
That list,
73.
I'm not looking at the particular list you have. It may start in 81 because that's when I sold my first novel. But I wrote articles and short stories before that.
That's what I was looking at. The first novel was 1981, but you were writing
Right.
since 73. That's right. I had to
Yeah,
scroll
that's when I
down just a
full
little
time.
further.
I
The
went full time.
so before that time, that you were in your 20s by then. What were you thinking? What was Joe Lansdale pre-writer days?
Pre-writer days, I was working other jobs. I was thinking I got to get the bills paid. I got to make sure that Karen and I could have food. We were both working like the proverbial Trojan. We had a goat dairy and we did farming. Before I met Karen, I worked in the aluminum chair factory. I worked in a mobile home factory, and I worked a lot of physical jobs. And Karen and I together worked a lot of physical jobs.
Mm,
And I did martial arts all through that, and I taught martial arts some, though there was no real money in that. But I also, I did roofing, everything you could imagine. And once the last job I had was as a janitor, a custodian, and I did that about 6 or 7 years. Part of it, most of it at the Stephen F. Austin State University, which is now a
mm,
University of Texas. But then I did some at the hospital, some at the high school, and I was writing all the time I was doing that, and I was
mm.
selling. Some point I felt I had enough. Well, I didn't feel I had enough, but my wife did. And she said, it's time for you to go full time. She probably regretted that later, though she never she never said that.
That's interesting. I think a lot of readers who've never actually put pen to paper themselves in a serious way, they picture us as just, being that solitary picture of a typewriter and a bottle of whiskey, and we're just sitting there, type, 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 and that's it. I think a lot of folks don't realize the physical work that is involved in getting your brain to flip that switch to
Yeah.
creativity.
I used to, I would work so hard that when I got through, I felt like I'd put in a day's physical work. I mean, it
Mm,
really exhausted. My brain was worn out.
right.
And that was especially true. I think when, we were raising kids and stuff, you're always worried about do the kids have what they need.
Yep.
And so, I worked extra hard, though I worked 5 hours a day usually, and then I moved to 3 hours, which I found far more realistic. And I did better work and actually got more done in 3 hours. But it consumes you, even in the other time when you're doing stuff and you're not consciously thinking about it. Your subconscious is in there with the blacksmith tool,
Right.
working.
Kasey, you grew up with your writer dad. He was writing, I believe, before you were born. He was already published and in that process. So it's kind of a life you knew.
Yeah, I mean,
How would you
it's
describe that?
it's weird because I get asked that all the time, but I never, it was just like dad went to work downstairs and mom, did everything else, and that was. I mean, I never thought of it as like anything noteworthy
Right.
until I got a little older, and then I realized like most people's parents left the house to go to work. Most people's parents weren't available in the way that my parents were, even though they were both working. If I needed something, they could come to the school, drop something off. So I did realize as I got older, but it also made it very clear that, even though it is a shorter period of time, and we've already touched on this, that, in the morning, that's work time. We all do our thing, and then we can reconvene after that. So it became very clear that between these hours, try to leave everybody alone because, it's just like being at a job. It just happened to be downstairs. So, you everybody wants there to have been this moment, and there really wasn't. It was just like everybody got up, went to work, did the
This is
thing, and
just
then we
the thing.
reconvened.
Yep. Yep. Dad's in his chair, mom's in her chair. I'm going to get in my chair, and here we go.
Yeah, and I never thought about it until got a little older, and then you realize how lucky you are to have everybody surrounded and available to you in a different way. So I mean, it's definitely not lost on me. And also, it's just what we did.
Right, right. That must have been pretty nice to having your parents physically there. I mean, there's a lot of in the generation of the 70s, 80s, 90s, there were still a lot of stay-at-home moms that were there for the kids, but it was becoming less and less common to where, by the 90s, pretty much most couples were both parents out of the house all day, the kids kind of left on your own.
No, I'm just thinking about it. It's like it was very much that. And you realize as you get older, and even more recently, how much mom was running everything that wasn't the writing portion of it, the business, the taxes, the home, all these things, and that is truly a full-time job. Not to mention raising myself and my brother, and then my dad was doing the writing. But if there was a choir field trip, or if there was something that needed a chaperone, having a parent that was always available, having both parents that were available, you do a play, both your parents are in the audience. You don't realize how much it matters until you get older, and then you realize like, oh, I'm moderately functional. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Like that really nicely.
I would say too, just to add to this, is that it was great joy to be. I was a house dad for a few years because Karen was working at the fire department as a dispatcher, and Keith, our son, who's a little older than Kasey, about 4 years so older, I took care of him at home and wrote too, which was difficult. And then along came Kasey, and I was still a house dad up to a certain point. And then I was doing well enough as a writer. My wife and I talked, and I said, if you're retired of your job, which she was, I said, you can quit and go to work for me, but I need certain things. Well, she was already kind of doing those anyway, bless her heart. And so she went to work for me, and it actually tripled our income because I wasn't taking care of the kids 100% all the time, but it did allow us to go to their soccer games and to go on field trips and to take them overseas during the summer or when we had time. We once, I took Kasey out of school for about a week or two and went to Italy.
Oh, nice.
Because we had the opportunity, and we didn't really want to, and our son was old enough that he was already working jobs and stuff, but she went with us to Italy for, was it a week or 2 weeks, something like that? But anyway, for a while. And so we always thought that kind of education was just as important as school, Absolutely. And I think that proved true.
Growing up in South Texas, in Nacogdoches. Did I pronounce that correctly? Nacogdoches.
And it's East Texas.
East Texas.
We don't be confused with other parts of Texas. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is.
East Texas, the slightly more humid, jungly part, right?
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah. Nacogdoches is the name.
How did that shape the writing that both of you do? And you guys could take turns on answering this. Because our lifestyle and the events and the things that happen to us typically shape our writers. We see right now a lot of military novels because we got a million guys and gals that just came out of 20 years of war, and those events shaped the stories of their life. For those of us, myself, I was in the military, but I never went to war. Therefore, my story is going to be completely different from their story. How did growing up in East Texas, living in East Texas, the kind of work that you did and do, how did that shape the stories that you tell?
Well, my East Texas would have been a little different than Kasey's East Texas, though they do overlap somewhat. But I was born in 1951, so I grew up in the 50s and 60s. And I became, I guess, a full-fledged adult, 18 in 1970. But I think the environment and the people and what was going on then shaped me a whole lot. And even though I write more modern stories as well, I don't think I really get too far from my background, my upbringing, and the things that have been impressed on me. Kasey may have a different answer there.
For me, I have what are especially in East Texas, considered older parents. And Dad had older parents. So I think, his mom was 41 when he was born, and my mom was early 30s, which there is, considered quite past the moment that most people are having children. So I think even though I was in a later generation, there's a lot that comes from me that is of an older ilk, because that's the language I heard. That's the mentality that was impressed upon
Yeah.
me. And then also, East Texas in many ways, and I don't even mean this in a negative, but in many ways, it's very behind the curve, what's going on. So there's also that little delay there, just socially, economically. It's not necessarily a thriving place. So there's a lot of those factors that creep in, and you see, sort of the opportunities that you do and don't have. I currently live in Los Angeles. It's obviously a very different environment.
Right.
And, I'm also able to see so many things. You have an idea of who you are when you grow up in this place, and then when you go out of that place, who you are looks very different. And some of those things are really good, and some of those things are not so good. So you sort of realize that everything is the sum of all those parts, right? So like in that environment, I may be considered maybe a little more liberal, and I come here and I go, oh, this is a very, so you sort of realize that there are so many different kinds of people and layers that you don't even have the awareness of. It's one thing to visit, but it's another thing to constantly be in it. And you just sort of have this awareness. And I think that has changed my writing recently, because there's that discovery process. And I think there's something interesting about that. And I think that's, even though I'm an adult, there's sort of that young adult feeling of like, oh, I'm getting this for the first time.
Right.
And I think that has been helpful to me as well.
Yeah, my mother was actually, I think, 38. My father was 42, and I was. My brother is 17 years older than I am.
Oh wow.
He's 88. I think that's right, 88. And we always joked that we were both only children, because by the time I was born, he was out of the house.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
that makes sense.
Yeah,
I mean,
so-
my kids have a 10-year spread between the oldest and the youngest, and they kind of, they're buddies, but they're from two generations.
Right.
Well, my father and mother, of course, my dad was born in 1909, so he was at the turn of the century. Mark Twain was still alive. Wyatt Earp was still alive. Annie Oakley, Bat Masterson. I mean, you name it. All the Buffalo Bill, they were all still alive when he was a kid, and he was probably 7 or 8 when Buffalo Bill died, and older than that when Wyatt Earp died. And those were people that were common to his experience, at least from what he heard about. It's not like now the internet,
Right.
but
those
were
were
he went
people
through
that were current legends.
Yeah.
New
Right.
legends.
He went through the Great Depression, and that formed a lot of his views.
Right.
And them having gone through the Great Depression formed a lot of my views. And my wife, her grandparents had gone through the Great Depression, and I think that impacted both of us. I think that we both still had that desire to keep string and rubber bands and anything that we might be able to use, because you never knew when it was going to happen again. But in our generation, that really didn't prove to be a problem, except to our drawers that were full of that stuff. You know?
What were you thinking? Well, I mean, throughout the 70s, you'd been writing short stories and articles and kind of plinking and tinkering with writing. And through that process, you wrote your first novel in 1981. Act of Love gets published. Now you're a name. Now you're out there. And what were you thinking when you wrote that first novel? And what did it feel like to you then when it became a reality, that first one that came out? And I'm going to ask you the same question here, Kasey, or you can just jump in and both of you can answer this about your first novel.
I just remember wanting to get it finished and wanting to sell it, and it went to many, many, many publishers before it did. It's like short stories. I had a tremendous number of short stories before I sold my first one. And so I just put my nose down and did it. And I had an agent that I acquired because of that novel who was just terrible. And, she was hard to deal with, et cetera, et cetera. But when I did that novel and finally sold it, I knew that I had broken a barrier. And then I sold another one the next week that I had written in 15 days under a pen name. And then I was asked to do some ghost work for a Western writer. And I agreed to, although he ended up having a quarrel with his publisher. So he never really did those books, but I got paid for the amount of work I did on them. Oh, nice. So that was how I was able to go first, full time. And I also had a bunch of short stories. 3 years later, I was struggling, and I thought maybe I shouldn't have gone full time. And then just a couple of years after that, my wife said, nope, stay right with it. And a couple of years after that, I hit it finally, and things just kind of went up. You know, they have their dips, but generally they go.
Well, for me, so I'm going to focus specifically on the first short story that I think impacted. So there was a project that I did with my father and brother when I was younger, and we were all younger, and it was recently filmed as a creep show episode. So it has a special emotional moment. But the moment that I actually felt a difference was the characters that this comic book that we have coming out. There was a character in there named Jana, and my dad and I had been asked to write a story for another project. It was a duet, and then Dad didn't want to do it. And I said, well, let me see what I can do. So I wrote a few pages. I sent it to him, and Dad wrote back a couple pages because he'd already said no. But I knew, I was like, all right, I can make this happen. Just everybody sit tight. So, cut to that story came out. And then that was the first time that Dad and I had collaborated as adults. It was the first time that my name was on a cover. It was the first time that it felt like I had ownership of this character because I started that story. So there was a lot of firsts for that. So to think about going from that moment to now, where we've had a collection with those characters, we've now done a comic book, we're hoping to do more. We've kicked around a novel idea, so that I think was an impactful moment because you sort of realize how the characters have legs, how they have legs for the readers, how they have legs for you, how they keep coming back and saying, hey, I'm over here. So I think that was sort of the big moment for me, was that short story, even though I had other short stories that had sold either collectively or individually. That moment, and that was in a collection called Dark Duets, edited by Christopher Golden. And he's a friend of ours, friend of both of ours, but I'd gone to a convention called Nikon as a musical guest. And then we'd started talking, and, he was like, why aren't you writing more? And cause I do songwriting, and I dabbled in writing, and it's always just kind of been there. I said, well, I'm a singer who writes, and I enjoy that. And that's nice. And then, he gave that opportunity, and then I was dabbling in it and putting together anthologies. So for about a decade, I would just kind of write something here and there when it presented itself. I wasn't chasing it, but I wasn't, avoiding it either. And then when the pandemic hit,
you were doing music.
I was doing a lot of music and touring. And so when the pandemic hit, I was suddenly unable to do the music that I had been doing. I was unable, all my gigs went away, my residency, all of the things that I'd the last, 10, 15 years really proactively going after was gone. And so the opportunity to do more stories was there because, the world was closed. And then we started doing it, and I was like, this is pretty great, So I actually just finished my first novel.
Oh,
and
congratulations.
And thank you. Yeah. So I'm actually really excited about that. And then had to go through. So because it's my first novel, I wanted to kind of branch out into my own world. So I ended up having to go through the process of finding an agent. And then, of course, that takes the time that it takes. The novel's been done for a year. I just signed with a new agent like 3 weeks ago. So to give you an idea, I think everybody thinks it's going to be a different process for me than it is for everybody else, but that's not true. We all have to do the same thing, and you have to have the content that speaks to somebody. And so now that's where we are, and hopefully we'll be moving forward with it. And somebody who publishes books, it'll also speak to them. So,
and one thing I would add is that we have our characters are Dana and Jana. We wouldn't have named them that had we known that we were going to put them together.
Yeah,
but we wrote that one story she's talking about as a separate story, and that character was on her own. What was the name of the story?
Jana and Aaron were in that story.
Yeah, but what was the name of the story? The story.
That one was Blind Love.
Blind Love. And but when I looked at that and I thought, I love this character, and she would go really well with my character Dana, but we probably should have used her middle name.
Yeah, we tooed when we should have froed on that one. But it's also kind of funny, and it's a talking point of, we obviously never intended to do what we've done, or we would have done that better.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it just happened that it connected with people. It just happened that there were more stories to tell, and it gave Dad and I an opportunity to do something together, that will last and be tangible for always. And I think that's really nice and a testament
I
of
have another collection of stories. You and I did another limited collection of short stories that were not related to the Dana Jana situation. They were individual stories that we wrote over the years. And plus, she has enough of her own. She could probably do a collection of her own now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been nice, you know, and I think a lot of that is a testament to how well we work together. A lot of that might be because we did all grow up very in each other's pockets. So, you know, there's not a, you know, a lot of people say, how's it to work with your dad? And I'm like, well, it's fine. You know, we battle it out when we need to battle it out, and we move forward when we need to move forward. But I never feel like, you know, there's not a moment of real contention, you know. So it's just because at the end of the day, I figure if there's something he really feels strongly about, he's got the experience factor, and I'm going to defer to that. And most of the time, I think he can look at what I'm bringing and go, oh, that's a new take, or that's an interesting version. We can kind of find that. And I think
she's, you know, it's got a youthful take. It's got a female take sometimes that I might not have had. I don't know, you know, but it's something, or her own just personality. And in fact, when we were doing the Jana story, it was she sort of took the lead, so it was very much her personality. So that when we moved it over to the Dana Jana, we kept that, and in fact, we all told all the stories henceforth because I'd already created the character and written stories by myself with that character. And so when we put them together, then we more or less took Kasey's POV to use for Jana, and that's how we've done it.
The people that think Jana, she's like, oh, she's a little over the top, and I'm like, hi, my name's Kasey. Nice to meet you. You know?
Yeah, that's
but
true enough.
It's the fictionalized version. It's the things I think, but I don't always feel like I can say. Right. But it does crack me up when people are like, oh my God, you know, and I'm like, yeah, that's how my brain works. Welcome. You know?
I think a lot of us writers do that have a character that's actually us. And it's like, yeah, this is me. This is what I would do if the laws were slightly different.
Right.
And I wouldn't go to prison for it.
I have a series called Hap and Leonard, and Hap is very much influenced by me and my growing up. I'm older than he is because he doesn't age as fast.
Oh, of course. That's the nice thing with our fictional characters. And mine, I keep them about 35 to 40. That way they can still do the big guy stuff, and they're not cracking apart yet.
Mine are 50 because when I was 50, I could do the big guy stuff.
So, and you kind of touched on this already, working together, collaborating. I've never done a full collaboration with someone. How does that work? I mean, you guys one lives in the middle of the country, one lives on the West Coast, and you've got a family relationship. But when it comes to writing and creativity, how does, you know, when you write one chapter and send it over and the other person edits it and comes back, you mentioned sometimes you'd say, okay, I'll just go by Dad's judgment. But how does it work?
I don't collaborate, first of all. The only people I like collaborating with are my kids. I collaborate with them, but we almost didn't collaborate because I really didn't want to. And then once we did, I thought, no.
Well, and the process really is usually, I would say we start the conversation, whether that's on the phone or whether that's in person, because, you know, I go home often. So it's not like there's years in between. I mean, I'm going home in 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I was just home 6 weeks ago.
Again.
I mean, like, I'm there. There's not a huge separation in time and space. So oftentimes we'll have the conversation and just kind of kick around the idea. And then depending on what the idea is or sort of who's spearheading it, in what we'll start, and then we'll email it back and forth. I mean, there's no question that being there in person is better. So when we worked on the comic, I'd say we did the majority of that in person. I was home for Christmas, and we would wake up, or maybe it was Thanksgiving, it doesn't matter, but we would wake up and we'd kind of pass the laptops. I'd write something, pass it to him. He'd go in, take out my best stuff, rewrite it, and then I'd go in, cut what he did, and we would write
my best stuff.
And then eventually we got to where we were just like, all right, this works. And it took a goofy spin because we were we were kind of one-upping each other, and there was a moment where Steve was like, all right, you guys got to pull it back. You know, at Dead Sky, he's like, you guys are getting a little wild here. But it was part of because we were having a lot of fun with it.
Yeah.
And that happens, you know, so that seems to be the best way to collaborate is in person. And then if not, emailing it back and forth.
Yeah, we've done both, and partially both on one story, you know, maybe a little bit of this, a little, column A, column B. I work real well with both my kids, actually, but it's a different experience. Kasey is actually, I can go to the bathroom and she can write while I'm gone. I come back, I can't hardly tell the difference. And then when she goes, I can kind of get into her voice, and then we kind of smooth each other over by rewriting stuff. Keith and I it's more like we have sort of the same ideas, you know, the kind of ideas, and we're able to work off, I think we work off tonality. I don't know if that's the right word, but
You and me?
What's that? Go ahead.
Who, you and me, tonality?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have a similar cadence and a similar rhythm to how we speak. I think, you know, I think Keith is a much more structured person in general, and his brain is much more, my brother Keith. And I think Dad and I, yeah, I feel like we take the long route to get to the same place. And I feel like Keith is like, or you could just walk straight there, you know? And so it's just a different mindset. And so I think that is both the fun of working with each of us, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I get different things when I work with Keith. He can be really, really rigid, you know, and I have to go, hey, you have to lighten up. But on the other hand, he can say, hey, look at this combination, the way it goes. And I go, yeah, you know what? That's pretty damn good. I didn't think of that because I've known people tell me what a great plotter I am, but I'm not a good plotter. I have a number of events that happen that eventually excite me that I think makes it feel like I'm a great plotter. You know, that's the best I know. I think Kasey's kind of like that too, really.
So you guys fall into that seat the pants writer kind of.
When I start thinking about plot, I never do outlines. I don't do notes. She does more than I do. Keith, I think, does a lot of it. But I can't write when I'm doing that. It takes the story away from me before I've written it, and I don't get surprised. There are probably some times when I would have probably done myself well by having it more structured, but I just can't hardly do it. You know, I can do something independent that I know I'm not going to write. You know, say, okay, here's a series idea or something like that. Right. That's different because I'm really doing a different kind of work because I'm not probably going to write it, or I might write a script or something, you know.
Right. It's more of a treatment of something, not the actual thing.
Right. Kasey and I did a treatment of something that we actually got TV interest, you know, so that's one thing. But, you know, and if I have a book that's written and I write a synopsis off an existing thing, I can do that because I've already written it. Right. And there have been times when they said, well, give me an outline for this. I just wrote the whole damn book. You know, I couldn't do it.
Right. So do you see, because I have a lot of friends that go both ways, that writing wise, I'm speaking, where some of the folks are like your son. They outline everything point for point all the way through. Basically, they write the book in a staccato format, and then they go back and fill out the bones. And then the other side that have no idea what's going to happen in the next sentence.
Yeah, Jeff Deaver has said that's how he does it. He does it. You know, we were on panels together, and he's a friend of ours. But he had said that he really details what he's going to do, and nobody has better twists and turns than Jeff in his books. That's kind of what he's noted for. Right. But he spends a tremendous amount of time, probably more time writing that than he does actually writing the novel because he's got it laid out.
Well,
and to me, I couldn't
put it all out by hand. You know, I mean, like Ann Perry would sit there and write every single thing out by hand, and then she'd hire someone to type it up, and then she would use that as her first draft, but extremely detailed. Yeah. I mean, that to me sounds like a nightmare, but going in no plan, also a nightmare. So I like to tent pole it. Like, here's where we want to start. Here's where we kind of want to be. And then here's where I think we're going to end. But what I found is we usually don't end where I think we're going to end. The first two are usually right. The third one is way off, but it doesn't matter because it gets me there.
Right.
Yeah, I sometimes have a signpost here and there that I think I'm going to get to that point, but I don't even do that much anymore. I used to think I knew the ending, and that would always not be the ending when I got there, you know, very rarely, because you have new things that you discover as you're doing the story. But I don't do multiple drafts either. You know, I might have occasional a section where I just say, okay, I messed up there, and I might rewrite that totally. But mostly, I do one draft and I do polishes as I go. In other words, I mean, if you put it with an old style typewriter, and I'm working in the day, and how many times I would correct it during the day, the trash can used to be that full. And now, you know, I'm doing that on the computer, but I do it day to day.
Right.
And then when I get about halfway through, I read it from the front to the middle, and I may make some more changes, but it's not a total draft. I write pretty tight. And then when I get finished, I go back and I do what I call a polish, not a rewrite.
Right. Right.
And now and again, you know, some books and stories vary a little bit. They might need more than others, but generally, that way, when I'm done, I'm pretty much close to done.
Right, right. Now, last night actually, I just completed reading that story that you just posted on Facebook, the freebie that you gave out, Weed Whacker Man.
Weed Eater.
Mr.
Yeah.
Weed Eater.
Yeah.
Disturbing story. Let me tell you. I read that and I was like, oh, that's twisted. That is a good story, but man, that's twisted. And what was twisted most to me about it is it felt like I was in the backyard of some buildings in Ohio where I went to school.
Yeah.
As a young man watching, I felt like, holy cow, this feels like a really disturbing thing that I'm watching. And
most of it happened. Most of it really happened.
Really?
My son was the guy who came in and told me there's a man out here who wants to see you. And he really was a blind groundskeeper they had hired because they were trying to save money. and he really did cut down all their flowers and all that. So up to a point, it's a real story. And then the rest of it was extrapolated, obviously.
Yeah, hopefully, or otherwise you'd have we'd be taking a whole different tack on this interview.
Yeah. A lot of the stories that I've written, especially early up until mid-period, were based on immediate things that had happened to me. A lot of others are based on things that have happened to others, or you know, the kids might send me something. Hey, have you seen this? Or Karen used to when she'd read the newspaper, she would, you know, outline something like that. So, okay, look at this. And so I was reading, and all that stuff went into my head, and it found a way out. But Mr. Weed Eater was a real guy.
Man, that was something. It was a good story, folks. Let me tell you, go to his Facebook page, go to his web page. You know, he puts a freebie out there pretty regularly, right? About once a week or so.
Yeah, every Thursday.
Yeah. What happens? It's my webmaster Lou Bank that puts it there for me every week.
Okay.
And he doesn't even have all the story. I need to give him more stories, you know, so he can do stuff with them, because I've probably written about 400 of them.
Oh,
and
holy.
And then he takes that one down and puts up another one, you know, because those stories do reappear in other anthologies and collections. And, you know.
Right. I recently started a Substack to do exactly that with my stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, most of those were in actual anthologies or collections books. And now they're, you know, I use them there to kind of introduce my work to people. And I use a wide variety of Lou uses a wide variety of stories there. He not long ago used the companion that we did together, you know, the one they did for Creep Show.
Okay. What how, speaking of the short stories, anthologies and so on, how do you compare that kind of writing with novel writing, and in your case, Kasey, with music writing? Because each one of them has a totally different meter to it, a totally different thought process behind them. Describe how would you compare those three, as well as things like comic books, graphic novels. I mean, you guys write in a lot of different genres.
Yeah, I'll take this to start, because I actually just did an interview with the Horror Writers Association, and he asked a very similar question, and I said, well, you know, I think of it as the song is a 3-minute short story. Right. So you have to write it in 3 minutes, and it has to be tight. And so every line matters. So if you think of the song as a short story, or for the novel, you know, a paragraph is the short story within the novel. So everything is a little breakdown. And, you know, conceptually, that all makes sense. And then when it came time to doing this comic, when I've done a couple other comics and I was adapting, and you sort of realize like how much is packed into each line when you're trying to strip it apart. You suddenly realize how powerful it is, and you don't you kind of step back. Like there were moments that we were adapting this story, the Case of the Bleeding Wall, and some of it we lifted right from the book because we wrote the story. And as I'm doing some of those lines, and you're keeping one action per panel, and you're having to be concise and show all these things, I was like, wow, I really see how much was shoved into that one line, how much nuance, how much meaning, how much, phrasing, because now I'm trying to put it in a little teeny text box. It's like taking your Facebook rant and putting it on whatever they want to call Twitter now,
Right,
and
right.
only so many characters. And you sort of realize like, oh, this dance to get there is not necessary. And I think for the novel aspect, in a way, to me, it's harder because I had to give myself permission to ramble and kind of meander through, whereas I'd only been doing short stories and novellas and, tighter mediums where I had to get to it quicker. So I had a hard time with the novel because I didn't realize I was allowed to just kind of go off on a tangent and come back because there was time for that. And then when I tried to switch back to a short story right after, I was like, oh, I got to change my brain. So, I had a challenge of kind of shifting back and forth. And, I see Dad do it very regular, but I can also see how it all really is a training muscle. It's like going to the gym. The more you do it, the more you do it consistently. Because when I was waking up every morning and working on the book, there was a momentum there. Whereas when I stopped and then tried to shift into a different medium, I thought, oh, okay, I'm going to have to power through that. And I thought that was interesting because, he does make it look easy because he's been doing it. And I won't say take for granted because that's not true, but I sort of forget sometimes that just because he makes it look easy doesn't mean that it is easy.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And one of the things is I'm probably the worst at giving like my kids writing advice. I just go, this didn't work and do it over.
True.
I truly believe that's the best writing advice. I believe you find it yourself, and if somebody else finds it for you, you're not learning it. You learn it a little bit from somebody showing you, but I won't let them get too far in the weeds if they're showing me something. But I do believe that, and I know there are people say this is how you write a novel. Here's how I do it. This is how it's structured. To me, that means nothing because I don't write like that. I'm very much more a storyteller than I am just a conscious writer, though I'm a stylist as well, and I try to do both. But for me, I think you learn more by doing. I just try to kind of like, a goalie, not let the hockey puck get past the net, but I let them develop it. And for me, it's different in that when I was starting out, short stories are my favorite. That's my natural meter. It's short stories and novellas. And so when I started out writing short stories, like Kasey, I had a hard time moving to the novel until I realized that these short stories in many ways teach you how to write a tight chapter and how to write a scene. Because really the best kind of writing for me is that I'm writing scenes. I think of it in terms of like a play or a film I like, if I do it that way, I can write a tight scene and I can actually get away with some stuff that I might not have gotten away with if I'm trying to write it based on some structured idea. I'm trying to give people an emotional gateway into the character, into the attitude of the story, more than I'm trying to give you a plot. Because I subliminally, there's a plot there, but I want you to discover it yourself and not have it laid out too much. I mean, sometimes you have to do that. And a novel, for me, I used to, when I would switch from a short story to a novel, it'd take me a week to get going. And when I switched to a screenplay or a comic, now it doesn't take any time. I mean, I can go from this one day and go to the other the next day. It's not problematic. I wrote a screenplay that I sold. I guess it was last year or year before last, and I wrote a novel and most of a memoir that I have that I'm supposed to get finished. So all of that, I'm sometimes in the same day. I would write on the novel, then I'd work over on the screenplay, and then I might switch over, and that's all done with usually about 3 hours.
And in your brain, it feels like you're doing something different each time.
Yeah, it's a different.
Like you went from the garage to the garden, and now you're out in the woods bucking wood.
As a different animal, but I found that I had written so many introductions and sort of memoir pieces over the years about my stories and different things like that, that it really helped me understand what that was about.
Well, and fiction versus nonfiction too. I think for me, nonfiction is so much easier because the answer is there. The answer exists. You're just telling the thing that is.
Right.
And that's also a different skill set. You know, it's like telling it in an effective, clear way versus creating it in your brain. And, you know, if I think of every chapter as a song, because another thing that I think helps is quick chapters and the idea of, you know, short stories, quick chapters, those kinds of things. Because I know as a reader, I like that. And that's also something that, you know, I kind of got from Dad is those short chapters, quick chapters, thinking of it as a short story. Think of every line as a little story into itself, and then transfer that to the comic book. And, you know, have each, you know, it's like it's all there. It's just how much you want to, you know, strip down to the minutia of it, but the concept for all of it's the same. And, you know, I'm still learning. I have no idea what I'm doing. And
too, you're always learning, you know. I think about a lot of things like from a poem or a song lyrics is that a lot of times you have to imply things that you're not really going to tell people, you know. There's songs where you look at them and say, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but each line is so good. What the hell is Bob Dylan talking about? But there's something about it that it has some sort of magical way of making your mind work on so many different images and ideas. The Beatles, especially after Sgt. Pepper, were masters of that. They moved from imagery, they moved from telling just a little, I want to hold your hand, to this imagery that didn't always fit, but it was much more like a painting, a sort of abstract painting to some degree. And I thought that was fascinating. You know? What's that?
Having the melody to drive that forward too, you know, so it's like that's another sneaky subliminal way to do it.
Yeah.
Actually, in that interview, I had been mentioned, or someone had mentioned, you know, well, what music do you listen to while you write? And I thought, well, I can't, because then I start listening to the lyrics. I start breaking. You know, I cannot have any music in the background because I get too invested in it. And then I look up and I've, you know, heard an entire playlist and I've not written a word.
Yeah, I'm sitting there.
I know.
You know, and I can't do that either. I did one book where I listened to music and I just said I'll never do it again, you know. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I remember Paul McCartney was an interview with him. He said John always started with lyrics and then he did the music, but Paul always starts with the melody, the melody, and then he develops the lyrics out of that.
It's two totally different ways of seeing the world, but beautiful. Yeah. And between them, they came up with some pretty intense stuff, as the two of you do as well.
Together,
we're exactly like the Beatles. Honestly,
exactly.
Going with this. Like,
if I join your band, can I be Ringo?
Yeah.
How does in the music world, Kasey? How do you when you write your songs? Basically, it's like your song is a 3-minute flash fiction piece, and it sounds like when you guys are writing your books, each chapter is a flash fiction story of its own. And then you string them together.
That feels right.
When you're doing, where was I going with that? I had a picture in my mind of asking you a question about singing and writing music, and then suddenly now I have a totally different picture in my mind halfway through the sentence. Sorry about that. We'll just edit that little question out because I have no idea where I was going with it.
Let's circle back to us being the Beatles, you know.
There you go.
So you can take, like Kasey sings a song, she can take a line, and the way she delivers it gives the line a different feeling. Another artist would say that same line, and it would give you a different feeling. It's the same way. It's not quite that way, but it's similar in writing in that because of the way I phrase it, even if I'm essentially saying the same thing, it gives it my feel. Someone else might phrase it different and gives it their feel.
Well, that's the comma, right? Because I know we have the storyteller comma, which editors hate because they have the real comma. And I've never seen so much anger over commas than dealing. And I think I'm probably slightly more accepting of the comma, but, you know, Dad will, I mean, the whole point is to write like you talk, write like you hear people talk. So sometimes those sentences are just rolling on and then there's a comma and then a comma and then a comma. But if you were to type out what I'm saying to you right now, I've not taken a breath.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
If you remember Hemingway, he would always use and sometimes as a replacement for a
Yes.
comma. And he didn't necessarily use a comma in front of or after and.
He just
And
took
was the comma. But then the next sentence, it might be the comma because it's a different feeling. And to get copy editors to understand that is hard. And the whole new generation of readers have not been taught the understanding of what a writer's trying to do. They just go, well, wait a minute, this sentence, it must be a run-on sentence. No, it's a long sentence, and it's an adventurous sentence, but it makes absolute sense.
Yes. Read it without breathing, and you'll get what the character was saying.
And then he went over there, and he couldn't stop, and everybody just kept coming. I didn't know what to do, so I just panicked and ran off.
Yeah.
That's one sentence. No commas are necessary.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that you
Exactly.
couldn't put them in there if you wanted, but they're not really necessary.
And you know, in looking at your stuff, I saw, Kasey, that you've also edited a lot of anthologies. And personally, I just went through the second. Well, I would say the second time that I wrote for this particular anthology, and both times the editor completely changed the voice of my story. And I'm so upset. I'm not gonna go back with that particular publisher again, because that's 2 times in a row. And yeah, he took out all my long sentences, became sentences with staccato periods in them and things like that. How do you handle things like if a story comes in an anthology, it has a particular feel to it. How do you put together those 8 or 10 disparate stories in that book and make it feel consolidated?
No, you know what? I cheat. I get really good writers, and I don't have to do much, because most of the time I'm asking that person because I like the way they write. I'm not asking that person because I want to write their story. I'm asking because I want them to write their story. And there's only been a handful of times that I can think of that I said, you know, and it's usually the ending. And I said, the ending doesn't really work for me. Can you fix it? And these people know what they're doing. You know, they go in and they tweak it, and I say better or worse. I've had it where it's come back and it's still not working for me. What do you think it is? Go back, fix it, come back. And then you either accept, like, if it comes back and it's still not, you know, what I'm after, I can either, as an editor, accept that this is what it's going to be, or I can accept that story, but I'm not here to rewrite someone else's story. That's not the editing that I want to do. It's not the editing I'm good at. You know, and so the funny thing is as I say it out loud, I realize the editing I'm good at is the same way that Dad helped me with stories, which is like, it's not working, but I don't know why. So, and you know, so I think really that's it, is you ask people that you like the way they write, because otherwise, why are you asking them if you just want to rewrite it? And I think it's the same thing with I had a similar experience where I wrote a story that has actually been one of my most well-received stories, nominated stories on certain projects. And I had an editor that went in and completely, because the way that I write is the way that I speak, and I speak like I'm from the woods, because guess what? I'm from the woods. So, you know, and channeling some of that, and especially leaning into it hard when I'm writing, you know, that vernacular and in that environment too. You know, you step into that moment. So I know how much I don't like the way that feels as a writer. So I want to do that to somebody else. And that doesn't mean I want to keep every story that's given, but it means that I start at a level where I don't necessarily go into it worried about that.
Yeah, you know, if I've edited about 15 or co-edited about 15 or 16 anthologies, and Kasey just answered exactly what I do. You know, there's a difference. Like when I have a proofreader and I've written a story, and they say, "Well, you know, you left out. You didn't start it with I went. You just say, or I did. You know, you left out certain words." I went, "Yeah, I know. I did it on purpose." That I can argue about. Sometimes if they come to me and say, "Hey, this sentence doesn't make sense," and I look at it, it doesn't make sense, then they're right, and I'll change it. But I won't change things just because they feel better about it. What I will do is, I don't think it matters much one way or the other, if I change it or don't change it, I'll change it. I'll throw them a bone so that they'll think they've done more than they have.
Right.
But on the other thing is that most of my stuff with my regular publishers learn to leave me alone, because I'm not, and they know I'm not going to do it. And I try to be very polite about it. You know, I try not to be mean spirited.
Right,
I think
right.
one time I may have hurt an editor's feelings. I just went, no, I'm not doing that. I don't like that at all. It just came right before I knew it. But most of the time, I'm fairly diplomatic about it. And if they send me a bunch of changes, I say, well, I'm going to look at all these changes and see what happens. And then I just do the ones I want. And they're happy with that. I mean, most really good editors know that the book belongs to the writer, not them. And especially the ones that try to say, well, what would be a really good storyline to go off on? Well, I'm not listening anymore because I didn't write that one. Write your own goddamn book.
Right.
This is my book, So I think you got to be open to changes when people come up with something good and they have a real smart comment. You need to listen, but you got to be willing to say no as well as yes. And I say no a lot more than I say yes. But when I say yes, I really mean it. You made a difference.
That is excellent. Okay, so we've come. You guys, this has been very informative. I feel like I'm a student sitting in a very cool classroom.
Bless your heart.
Laid back, sitting in the teacher's lounge with the experienced teacher and the newish teacher, and here I am just like,
Dude,
that's it.
Just here taking notes, can't wait to go home, hate these kids,
What advice would you give to new writers? I mean, this is for international thriller writers. Probably 2/3 of the people watching this video are writers. Some may be published, most maybe not. I don't know. What advice would you give? How would they get into? You got a stack of short stories you've never published. How does a person find an anthology publisher?
Well, I mean, I see. So what I do is I follow, and I don't know the range of people that are part of this group, but what has helped me is following a lot of these social media accounts and or joining their mailing lists, because often doing open calls, they announce it in those platforms.
Oh,
so
okay.
you're alerted to it. You can also Google, who is accepting thriller stories right now, and submit it. I mean, so there are options like that. There are less options like that nowadays. There's not many open calls. There's not a ton of opportunity for that. So I think the real effective thing is go to a convention, go to a thriller con, go to those places where those editors are, because I can tell you every time that I've chosen someone to be a part of it, it's 99% of the time it's because I saw them last weekend and they're fresh in my brain. I mean, and that's really it. It's like, and because I know they're good at what they do, but I just saw them and they would be perfect for this and it's not even, because I've had people that I know are excellent writers that I've known basically, if not realistically, my whole life. And it was like, why didn't you invite me? And my answer was, you know what? Because you weren't standing in front of me. That's it. I forgot. I mean, there's nothing to it. So it's like, those are the moments where if you're in those groups, if you're in those, the reading groups, whatever it is, because someone somewhere is publishing, and there's been a meme going around lately, and it's all said, everything I've gotten to this point in the fiction world is because someone else helped me. And I think that's true. It's finding those people that do the kind of thing that you do, putting yourself around them, and then saying, hey, you know what? I've got this story. What do you think should happen? So if someone were to ask me, my answer would be figure out what the next thriller convention is, go to the panels, talk to the writers, go to the editors and say, hey, are you guys doing any open calls? Where do you think, someone who's more in the depths of that. I don't know who's doing an open call right now, but I do see them. And when I see them, I sometimes send them to writer friends. Hey, did you see this? Did you see this? So just putting yourself in a group of people who are after the same thing can be very helpful for that. I don't know that it's as helpful for some people. Really like people to workshop their work and feedback and all that. I don't want that because I have a different situation for that. I can ask Dad to do that, and that satisfies me. Mm-hmm. I think for some people that's very helpful, but if nothing else, being around other people who are doing it at any level, like this group, it's a really good start, because I'm sure somebody in that group, in that organization, has had things published. They might have a line on it.
Oh yeah.
They might say something.
This is international thriller writers that we're doing it for. So
yeah.
Joe, you're on the big list on there too, aren't you?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, those
Yeah,
are the
I've never been to one of those conventions, but what the advice you gave you is very good because
Oh yeah.
I used to. My times were different because once I finally started selling, I was very fortunate. I was like king of the anthologies.
Mm.
I never had to go out and I quit writing for magazines or quit trying to break into magazines because before I could try to do that, somebody says, "Hey, have you got a story? I got this anthology I'm doing," and I would end up doing a story. So I never had to hunt for them after really probably by the middle 80s. From then on, they came to
Once your
me.
name was
And
out there on people's
yeah,
ears.
yeah,
Kind of
when
like what
I
you were
got
saying,
some more,
Kasey. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's quick. I think that helps too. I think people know that he'll get something to them, and
yeah,
and that's it. You know, they know now he's a name, and of course, the more you see somebody's name, the more they're on the forefront of your brain, and then work it begets work.
Right.
and you get to
Right.
where when I was doing anthologies, I knew there were writers that were going to write a story. There was a level they were never going to fall below.
Mm.
And then I knew that because they were doing it for me and I had expectations, they were going to raise that level. I know I did. When
Mm.
I do them for Lawrence Block, it's not that I don't do the best I can for everybody, but there's a subconscious little gear in there. I'm doing this for Larry, one of my heroes, when I was growing up. So that changes everything,
You know what?
know?
Perfect example. I was at a BoucherCon and we were standing in line with our stack of books to get Lawrence Block to sign. And I've got the stack that's the overflow of Dad because you're only allowed X amount. And so Dad's like a little kid hopping. He gets his book signed, and then I'm next. Hey, I'm Joe's daughter. Blah blah blah. He goes, "You're writing now too, right? Do you want to be in this anthology?" And I'm like, and it's literally because I'm standing in front of him,
Yeah.
and we and don't get me wrong, like it's not lost on me that there's a last name connection and that helps, but I also have to turn in the story and he has to accept it and it has to be all.
Exactly.
But I could not have even been asked, period, had I not been literally standing in front of him.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's so true. And like when I was doing it, there were lots of magazines. People were complaining. The pulp writers that I knew were going, "Yeah, there used to be all these magazines." Well, we thought there were quite a few then, but now magazines are a thing of the past. Pretty much, they're online, some of them, yeah. And there are markets online. I don't keep up with them much because, like I said, I haven't needed to shop.
Right.
I mean, as
Right.
time goes on, I may need to shop, but that hadn't been the case. I mean, I get somebody asking me to do a short story every week or two. And another factor is when you've been doing it for a while, you need to finally decide, I'm not writing another story for this amount of money. I have to have this amount of money because I've earned my spot. That doesn't mean I won't, in case it's something, a friend, or I just think it's a cool anthology, I'll do it. But I pretty much have developed that. But the reason I developed that is I used to go to these conventions. I remember I was standing in line at a Western Writers of America convention. I went to those. I went to BoucherCons. I went to a lot of world fantasy, a lot of science fiction things because I loved all that stuff. But I was standing in line at a Western convention, and there was a guy in front of me, and we just kind of talked. He was real friendly, and I got real friendly. And it turned out he was Pat Labruto, who was the editor for Doubleday at that time for their genre fiction. And he said, "I read a story by you. It was in Charles Grant's Shadows." And I said, "Yeah, that was me." He said, "I really like that." He said, "Do you have a book going?" I said, "Absolutely." I did not have one page, one paragraph, nothing. And I said, "Absolutely. Would you like me to send you some pages?" And he said, "Why don't you do that and give me a little synopsis?" Well, I can't do synopsis. It's worth a damn. So I went home and wrote about 50 pages. And then I probably in about a week, I wrote about that 50 pages and I sent it to him with like a few vague sentences. He said, "I really like this." And they bought it based on the what I had written in the chapter. Then I had to write the rest of it. And that was The Magic Wagon. And in some ways, I consider that my first real Joe Lansdale book. Maybe The Night Runners, but there's something about The Magic Wagon that found my voice. I still think it's one of my best books, and all the way back to the 80s. But that was my moment. I was standing right there. I did have something that he could look at. That's the other thing. Once you get other fiction published, people will go, "Oh, I've seen your name," or "I read a review," or "I've sold books just the fact that people saw a review." And the editor said, yeah, I saw a really good review of that book. Have you got something else? Well, it doesn't mean they're going to buy it if they think it's terrible. But what Kasey was saying, now they know me and they got a face to me. And maybe even we had a personal connection. Certainly Pat and I are still friends. And I think that was one of those fortunate moments when we just kind of clicked together. And I've had that happen with people that were editing anthologies. They go, why don't you try me on this anthology I'm doing, whatever it is, And it led to it. And after a little while, one of the best things is once you develop a certain momentum, then other people come to you or they find you, or it's not hard for you to find them. Like Kasey and Keith both had some advantage with the last name, but they didn't make what they did on their last name.
Right.
So that might have helped open the door a little bit, but they had to write the story and it had to not suck.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big thing.
I'm feeding my pit bull here is what I'm doing.
No problem. My little Yorkie keeps coming up and scratching my leg.
Yeah,
He wants to climb on the
That's
chair.
what all this stuff over here is that I'm giving him some peanut butter treats. And he knows that I'm talking to you. He goes, I'll bark if you don't give me something.
He's got a tree. Well, and I was thinking about the conventions and things too, because we're going to StokerCon this weekend, which is a horror convention. It's not a cheap excursion. Right. So I also know that can be a hindrance. So, but I also see that one thing they're doing now more than ever is they're offering virtual convention attendance. They're offering virtual chat rooms. They're offering, and I know it's not exactly the same, but it's a good start. And I know there are community writing groups that sometimes can be helpful, sometimes not. It depends on who's a part of them and what, because if you're all just part of that same, passing that same dollar around, that at a certain point, that's not helpful. But there is a group that was going to be a fit for whoever this person is. And those people are going to be talking about, well, I met this person and I did this. And then that group is going to start to rise together.
Right.
And then opportunities are also going to spread. So, I see a lot of that now. And I feel like the people who were the dad fan base when I was little, those are the ones who are lifting up now.
Yeah.
And so hopefully I'm part of that next group and we're lifting up, so it's like you kind of find those peers and also because they get what you're doing and they, they're people that you connect with because you have
no struggle.
Know the struggle.
Well, what you said though is no different really than what we would. I used to go to these conventions. My wife and I would save pennies. We literally sometimes had 5 and 6 people sharing a room with us, and we would save pennies and we would bring peanut butter and bread and tuna fish and whatever and make our own sandwiches until we finally got to where we could throw those people out, and then we could buy lunch, and then we could buy lunch and dinner, that kind of thing. But we would go to conventions so I could meet heroes of mine like Robert Bloch or Fritz Leiber or Theodore Sturgeon, and Michael Moorcock, who's also a friend. But you would meet these people, and sometimes just the fact that you suddenly realize they're people just like you was already going to help you feel more connected to the possibility of being able to do what they do. But then a lot of times too is if you listen, like William F. Nolan, I'd listen to Bill, and he became a very good friend. But they would say things that made you realize I need to pay attention here so that I don't have that same fault. And I would know numbers of writers that were with me they did that same thing. That they made the same mistake that this writer was trying to say avoid. Now, not everybody's going to have the same, need the same thing,
right.
But if you pay attention, you learn a lot. And also, these were our heroes. These were our writing gods. Richard Matheson and like I said, Robert Bloch and Ray Bradbury and all these people. And then one day you look up and some people foolishly think you have become their writing gods.
Right.
And right or wrong. And but there was a bunch of us like David Scow and Chet Williamson. I could make a long list. But we found our group. We all didn't fit in it exactly, but we all had some kind of connection. I was always a little different because I didn't live in the city and I wasn't as connected to those people. Even people in Austin had their own group, but I was just kind of outside of that. But I had enough, fiber connected with all these people that I'm getting all this interest. And then when they do an anthology, they go, oh, let's ask Joe. He's done some stories. And then, I did my best stories for people that I knew and wanted to impress, I want that guy to know I'm one of the big dogs, And so you would try to write as best you could. And if you were lucky, you were a big dog.
Right. That's pretty cool. I like that idea.
And one other thing is that people, Kasey was saying, it's not a cheap thing to go to these.
Yes.
I did know people who couldn't afford to go, but they would get a motel nearby and they would come hang out in the lobby and the bars. Now, I'm not saying that's a great thing, but you meet a lot of people in the lobby and the bars. One of the times I actually did go to a Western Writers Convention. Larry McMurtry was kind of the big guy that was at this, but I came in and I had my suitcase and everything. And I went over and talked to Larry McMurtry, and he was really kind of a turd, really, when I talked to him. He was just like, he'd rather not be bothered. But he wrote that great novel, Lonesome Dove, and many others. I mean, I'm a fan of, but I went over and sat on the couch, and I was really kind of bummed out. So what an asshole. And he may have just been having a bad moment because he may have been dealing with that stuff all day long. And there was an old man sitting there and a younger man. I don't remember the younger guy particularly, but he was somebody that I had met before. And they were talking, they were having a big talk, and I'm sitting and listening to him. And the older man sort of engages me too. And so we're all talking about Westerns and stuff like that. And then the other guy said, I don't remember what he said, but he said something. And that old man said, yeah, if I had that to do over, I'd have shot the kid on the first page. And I thought about that, and I thought, okay, he's a writer, shot the kid on. And it was Jack Schaefer who wrote Shane.
Oh,
and,
wow.
And then it becomes even more amazing. I had a copy of Shane in my bag. I had an old paperback, and I had brought with me to read. And I thought, oh, my God. I said, man, I hate to ask, but he said, I'm glad to do it. So I still have that copy signed by Jack Schaefer.
Mm.
Well, in that lobby, I met somebody that excited me so much because I'm a big Schaefer fan, especially for Shane, but other things too, Monty Walsh, and I thought, wow, I'm in here with the big dogs. I'm a little dog, but I'm in the same cage or the same pen.
Yeah.
You got big dog McMurtry over here, but he's not a nice dog. But all this,
Cujo.
And so,
Cujo.
Yeah, you got to watch out. You got to be quick. And I'm sure he was a great guy. Just I think he was shy, strangely. And anyway, but after that, that's the same convention that I sold that book. Oh. And then it's also the same convention that I got a line on that to where I also did 2 anthologies for Doubleday.
Oh, nice. Nice.
I edited 2 anthologies. So I think Kasey's right. It's probably the most important thing you can do. And I think that's helped her maybe more than having the last name Lansdale.
Honestly, that is it. I think it's because I've known so many of these people since I was very little. I mean, really my whole life. And then you get to a point where you go like, all right, well, you're still here. Do you want to do something? And granted, I wouldn't get that opportunity, but it just became that once again, I was in their face again. And then they thought like, all right, well, let's try, and it gave me opportunities to work on things that were not very good. So I got opportunities that were helping me get the muck out, I really don't want anybody to read anything I've written like for the last 10 years. It'd be great if they could just never read that and only pick up the last couple 4 or 5 years, because I think I probably would not have kept doing it because I knew that it wasn't what was good enough, and I probably would have just continued with the music and written time to time. And that would have been something I did that was fun. But because I kept getting the opportunity, I was able to keep still honing. And now I at least feel like I'm starting, like he was talking about, I'm at least starting at a certain level where it's not going to be the worst thing that's ever been written. Mm-hmm. It may not be the best, but I can feel comfortable about it. And I can know how far I've come, which means how far I can still go. Right, and I think that had a lot to do with it, because otherwise, you get beat down, you get rejected so many times, you get told no, you get all the doors slammed in your face. And I think getting the opportunity to keep crawling through the window is what was really helpful, and feeling like, okay, well, that one didn't go over so well, or they didn't accept this story, or they said no for this reason, but that all is something that I'm using to learn from for the next project, you know, and then getting that opportunity again, like, oh, okay, well, I learned it. I shot the kid on the first page now. You know, what's next? And I think there's so much of that, you know.
Yeah, you know, I literally had 1,000 rejections before I sold. Let me take that back. I had begun to sell before I got 1,000, because back then when you sent it to a magazine, it was about 4 years. I got 1,000 rejections, but I didn't have 1,000 stories, because I could send one story to 10 or 15 magazines. Right. So I had 90 to 100 stories that I was sending out that were terrible. But I was able to get all the crap out of myself. I mean, I didn't know they were terrible when I was doing them, but I knew they were terrible when I finished them. But I sent them out, and there were, one of the things that Kasey kind of said it too is, and back then it was even more so, there were so many magazines looking for material that were different levels that I had a chance to be bad in some of those others, because it was some of the best stuff they were getting.
Right. They publish anything.
10 years of stuff is just not worth much.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of that stuff I'm just quiet about. And, you know, it's been reprinted in little special editions or something. But that was the 70s were my time to learn how to write. And my wife, we both, like I said, we farming and all that, but we got to a point where the weather was so bad that outside of just taking care of the goat dairy part, she had another job. And I was about to get another, because the one I was at, I couldn't work in the fields because it was just a terrible winter. In fact, we found a dead body during that time. Man. But but the thing is that she said, well, look, I've got this good job over here in it was in like these freezer trucks where you load lunch meat in to be traveled to the particular stores, different stores. She had to wear like a little suit, you know, a little freezer suit. Yeah. I was more than that. It was like it looked like a hazmat thing. And because it was a freezer, you know. But she said, why don't you take 3 months to write? But when I come home, you better have something finished. And I was always scared of my wife, because she was generally right about those things. So I would work when she was gone. At that time, I didn't know, I hadn't worked out my 3-hour rule, and I worked all day. And when she would come home, I would have one story written from beginning to end. In 90 days, I had 90 stories. Oh, wow. And I was sending those out. I started, you know, after the first one, sending them out. So I would, you know, envelopes, you put the return postage inside, and so on. And after that 90 days, over the next 4 years, I was still sending those stories out, and they were coming back. But a few of the rejections were kind of interesting, kind of nice. And some of the editors said, you know, you got something, but this isn't it. And so I would try it again. I had one editor, I wrote a story, sent it to him, and he said that. So I was all excited, and I rewrote it, sent it back. And he said, no, this still isn't it. I rewrote it again and sent it back. He said, the more I see this story, the more I hate it. Try something new. And the next one I wrote, he bought. That was Sam Merwin for Mike Shane Mystery Magazine. And I've always thought about that. But, you know, that's that learning curve she's talking about. But some of those stories were bought, you know, during that time, because they weren't all that bad. Right. And you had different magazines with different levels of acceptance. Right. So it's about staying with it more than anything.
Right. Well, that is really cool. I like that. And, you know, you're right about the convention thing and getting out and seeing people consistently is a key word in that.
And that,
so
it is hard, but you know,
I'm up here in Alaska. It's $1,000 plane ticket to go anywhere. And so I've managed to make 2 ITW events in New York City and a couple of APAC audiobook actors.
Never been. David Morrell's the guy that got me in the thing in the first place.
Yeah, David Morrell. And matter of fact, I remember sitting there because I would hang out in the lounge after the events, and I'm sitting there with John Gilstrap, who's a writer that I narrate for regularly, and Mark Cameron, who's in the lounge but doesn't drink. And I don't drink it. He's the new Tom Clancy, so he was hanging. And then next thing I know, I realized I'm hanging out, and Jeffrey Deaver is sitting here, and R.L. Stein is sitting here, and I didn't recognize them because I don't read their stuff. And as the conversation's going on, he's like, Jeff, and I think Robert, is that correct for R.L. Stein? But people are using their real names, and at some point I realized I'm the little chicken sitting here in the big pen. So yeah,
That's the way I
it was
used
really
to do
cool.
Robert Block and Fritz Leiber and Matheson and all of them. And in fact, I still do. I mean, to me, they're still the guys.
Right.
It probably will be till the day I die. Those are the guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like an imposter when I think about them.
Yeah. Speaking of imposters, so this is the final part of every interview that I do. I try to add in a segment because I've got these guys that live in my house that insist on being part of the show. So this is where I ask the leprechauns that live in my basement to come out and join my butler, Gerald de Troll, to ask you to reveal a deep reality about yourself, bearing the very soul of the Lansdale genetic line for the world, as it were. So, without further ado, I introduce you to Bertold the Leprechaun and Gerald de Troll, my butler.
Wow, that's a tough question.
This is going to be... Okay, Gerald, you ready?
Yes, sir. I am ready for this interview.
Bertold?
Of course I'm ready. I've been standing here the whole time. Okay, here we go. Hello, Joe and Kasey. We are certainly glad that you came to join Mr. Basil's little show here. And I am Bertold. I'm the youngest of the 4 leprechauns that lives under the crawl space under Mr. Basil's house. Don't worry, we made it look nicer than he had it to begin with. And this is my friend, our butler, Gerald. Gerald, introduce yourself.
Oh, hello. I am Gerald de Troll, Mr. Basil's butler. Please let me know if you have trouble with my accent, as the boss is trying to train me out of my Cockney to be more understandable to most American humans, etc. I will be standing outside the booth, though, and talking loudly to the microphone, as I'm rather large and too big to get inside. So, with that, Bertold.
Okay, now normally we have my 3 brothers join us for this part of the interview, but they're away on important leprechaun business. So, that said, my brothers recorded a short greeting for you, which I'll play right now. Hello, Joe and Kasey. We're Bertold's brothers. Whatever you do, don't take his investment in fact... Oh, that's odd. The recording cut off.
Well then, should we get on with the question for them? Yes?
Yes, Jared, let's get on with the question for them. Now, the question is in the form of a scenario.
A scenario that will draw out the true spirit of both the beings that are known as you.
Known as you.
The beings that are known as you. Thank you, Bertold.
So, anyway, you have a wonderful father and daughter picnic, sitting in a pretty little meadow along the banks of a beautiful river. That's the scenario.
Oh, I love pretty little meadows.
As you munch on a cucumber sandwich, sipping your favourite beverage between bites, a sudden disturbance in the river draws your attention.
Oh, is it a River Sprite? I love River Sprites, unless they're not the nice ones.
Yes, Gerald, it is a river sprite, good or bad, we don't yet know.
Oh my, such tension in this story. Okay, here we go.
The river sprite rises from the water, walks across the surface of the river onto the bank, straight up to your picnic blankie, and you, with half a slice of cucumber hanging out your mouth. The sprite speaks before you, her hands closed into tiny little fists, and says, "Quick, you must take up this quest to fight the river dragon that is coming to devour all the melons in California. 'Cause that's where you live, right, Kasey? Anyway, you must stop this beast lest it destroy all that good and acceptable stuff. And Mr. Basil loves watermelon, so you have to save it. There comes some magical items imbued with some power. You have your choice of 1 item each. Sorry, you can only have 1, but the current Sorcerers' Union strike has really put a crimp on things for us to work actively in Fairy. So here's the things." Gerald, you read, because this voice is too hard to sustain.
All right, I will read the rest of these. The things are a magical sword, but it smells slightly of eel. A magical Chinese fan, the paper kinds, that waves away flames and smoke, but has a very clunky opening mechanism. A magical chainsaw, including special flippy switch for doing nastier things with. Number 4 is a 4-piece matching dinner and fine silverware flatware set, also magical, of course. And then there's a tire iron. It's just a tire iron. And a magical flute. Oh, and with your one choice, you get to take this talking wooden spoon that will guide you on the quest to restore the universe to its proper place in the universe. So, which will you choose to save the world?
Oh,
Dinner
that's a lot
set,
of
man.
choices.
Got the spoon with.
I'm going to go with the fan.
The magical fan. That is a good one. You got to get that clunky opening thing going, though. My big fingers don't make it work right. So, here you go. Magical fan for you. And what was your choice again there, Joe?
Yeah, what was your choice?
Because there's a spoon. You said there was a dinner set, with dishes. So
Oh,
that's
yes,
one I
the
want.
magical four-piece matching dinner in silver. We don't know what the magic does with those plates. It could be that it makes the food
I got
appear.
more items. I get more items that way, and then there's that spoon.
The magical talking spoon. That's a good one. Oh, okay, well, I am so happy to be rid of that annoying spoon. Says, maybe they can deal with this constant chatter. What are you talking about, Esmeralda? You sending me away?
Right.
So, thank you for coming. And say, can I interest you in my new digital currency? It's called Plover Cash. For what?
Oh, that is all, Bertold. Your brother said don't do that. It was very nice to meet you both. You seem like nice humans, and I hope you survive your quest, especially with that spoon. Oh, that's an annoying spoon.
With that thought, thank you, gentlemen. You may go back to your cubby. And Joe and Kasey.
Spend a lot of time by yourself, do you?
That is
The
my
tension
life.
was high. I was very stressed out. I was like, what are we going to do? Where is this going?
Yeah.
Joe and Kasey, any final words for the audience out here?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And if you want to check out the comic book, it comes out May 28th. I think it's already out in the wild. Check it out. If you enjoy it, let us know. If you don't enjoy it, just keep that to yourself. But we're everywhere that you can find us. Facebook, Instagram, all the things, website.
All the things.
We share things like when I see open calls, I share them to different things. So it's like even if it's not us, follow people who are in that world to get those discoveries, because I think everybody mostly wants to help everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's got to kind of find their gang. You got to find your team, and at different generations have different ones. And you all kind of encourage each other. And it's funny because some of those people that I met then are still very dear friends of mine. Some of them aren't anymore. Time just passed.
Right.
But I think it's good when you're new to have that moment in time when you find your people,
That's it.
because it helps you.
That's it. Very much so. All right. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I'm excited. The comic book, we didn't talk much about the comic book, and I'm sorry about that, but it is really good. As an adult who is a writer and who reads a lot, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed that comic book, and actually read through it multiple times in one evening on my Kindle, and it was very interesting. Very
Thanks.
cool.
We have
you very-
isn't it? That was definitely the example of us just trying to one up each other.
There you go.
Yeah.
That
And
working.
Daniel's making it so beautiful, his art is so unique.
I meant to get into questions about the art and working with the artists on those, and that didn't happen. But that opens us
Also
up
a
for
friend
another
of ours.
interview next
Yep.
time.
That's right. That's
You
right.
bet.
Enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. It's been great chatting with you. And who knows? Maybe we'll see again in the future, or run into each other at a conference somewhere if I ever get outside of the Arctic.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you.